Welcome back to the Leading Detection podcast. Today, we're joined by Andrew, and we're going to be talking big picture and looking at the cyber fraud fusion. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. It's good to be with you today.
Amazing. So, yeah, we're going to talk cyber, we're going to talk fraud. Why can't we keep cyber and fraud in separate silos anymore? What's changed?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, right, how does fraud happen? Fraud is happening cyberways, right? Online. Everything's digitized nowadays. You look at how these things were historically treated as separate disciplines. And as we know, modern adversaries really don't operate in silos. So it's all driven by monetization, not disruption. So I think if you look at it this way, right, with everything becoming a cyber event, whether it's phishing, malware, credential thefts, everything's online, right? And as we think about an organization and where you have your fraud teams and your cyber teams, right? A cyber team might see a spike in logins,
Yeah.
right? And your fraud team might see, well, I'm seeing a spike in applications. Is
Mm.
there a correlation between these two? Right? Yes, one could argue there could be a correlation to these two. But as we think about what these teams do, right, is they're doing recon work. They're doing, they're looking into the actual transactions. They're looking to understand what are they trying to exploit? What is the monetization game that they're going after? And if you bring these disciplines together, right, it's not about, consolidated dashboards or creating more alerts. It's about shifting from event-centric detection to adversary-centric intelligence, right? You're sharing the intelligence across these two disciplines together, whether it's devices, email addresses, IP addresses, the actual entity, the bank accounts, crypto wallets, etc. And then you have that correlation between these two, between the signals for fraud and the cyber telemetry. So I think, bringing these two together, you're not just treating them as transactions in silos. You're
Mhm.
looking at this as a whole and the actor, right?
Yeah.
And linking them together, to me is powerful.
So, I mean, from the start, why have they been separate, right? Because fraud, very human side, cyber's the very digital side, but they seem very similar. So why were they separate ever, effectively?
I mean, I think it varies also by organization and how they're organized and how they're structured. I think, cybersecurity has rapidly evolved over the years. And you look at, obviously, say the word AI here, right? It has only propelled those efforts and for all the right reasons for the evolution of cybersecurity. But just like cybersecurity, you also have fraud. I think you have this rapid evolution, and perhaps it's been let me focus in on my cybersecurity efforts to make sure my brand is protected. I have an understanding as to who's coming through my workflows, etc. And fraud has been kind of more of a behind the scenes reactive approach, right? So I think if maybe you look at the two as silos historically, and where you can bring them now is, given everything is digitized, everything is online, the tools that cybersecurity and fraud use today to detect and prevent are really one and the same. So I think you have the evolution of tools, you have the evolution of the threats as to why maybe traditionally they were siloed,
Yeah.
and with that evolution as to why they could come together now.
So this is a theory I'm going to throw at you. So fraud has been as old as time, right? And it's very much being done yourself, right? If you got defrauded, it's very, very personal. It has been. Of course, there was laws to protect, but cyber was just security, it was just protection. And do you think the rise in fraud has kind of looked to the security systems and the cyber team and say, hey, you're just as much a part of this? So do you think it's fraud pulling cyber to them, or do you think it's cyber putting an arm around fraud and saying, hey, we can help you here?
Cyber being that big brother,
Yeah.
guiding little brother along. Yeah, I think it's a great question, but I think it also comes back to the last question of how that organization was aligned, right?
Mm.
A fraud teams maybe traditionally reported up through your risk teams or your finance teams. And your cyber teams are probably more of the IT or security arms, right? So you had different organizational alignments. And I think, to me personally, it's the evolution of the threats and
Mm.
how they are interacting with the firm that they are attacking per se. And I think you see more of that. Wait, these are traditional cybersecurity measures or cybersecurity signals, but with the evolution of fraud, and how good these actors are, you're kind of using what security has traditionally always used. But I would also say the mind shift from a security lens is also understanding what is the impact of that fraud, right? So maybe it's the signals and the methodologies from a security lens that are guiding this along. But then you have the advantage here is the fraud teams are closing the loop as to, well, what is the overall impact to these
Yeah.
events, right? So I don't want to say one's more dominant here in bringing these two together to create the fusions, but I think they have equal parts. But it depends on which area you want to go down. If you want to talk about tactics, cybersecurity. You want to talk about impacts, maybe it's the fraud side.
Interesting. So when we talk about fusion centers, what do they actually do? I mean, it's not just the two teams sitting in the same room, right? So what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, sharing of best practices, learning from one another,
Yeah.
sharing capabilities, sharing skill sets, leading the teams to be intelligence led versus driven off of alerts, right? Think of your traditional fraud shop as alerts, alerts, alerts,
Yeah.
alerts, right? And it's like endless queues, right? But how do we, by fusing these two together, can we have more intelligence led driven prioritization versus you know, false positive, positive, false positive, right? And you're kind of going through that monotonous, right? And then you also have the enrichment of signals, right? And feedback loops. Maybe you get a better cohesive system that's better at protecting your brand from fraud, but also
Yeah.
identifying security threats faster as a result of this, right? Can you bring them all together and the power of AI to identify things quicker, resolve things quicker. So that human analyst is augmented by AI and not replacing it.
Yeah. You mentioned AI. Of course, it massive. Um,
What's a conversation today without it, right?
yeah, you walk into a bar and like people you would never expect to hear the words AI coming out of the mouth are mentioning it. It's hard to get away from. If we are talking about in fraud and in cyber and strategy, old school was kind of if and then and rules, very simple, right?
Correct.
They appear to be failing a little bit now against kind of modern fraudsters.
Well, I mean, good example is that look at how many transactions are now happening today versus 5 years ago, 10
Mm,
years ago, right? Everything's digitized. Not to shift gears here, but look at forming a new business, right? Some states in the United States used to require you to go in person to file that registration, right? Since the pandemic, that has dried up, and now you could form a corporation or LLC from anywhere. You
mm,
could do it from your mobile phone. You could be on the beach and start your entity, right? You could be anywhere in the world and start an entity. And then you have the rapid advancements of technology that allow you to move faster and scale. And if you give that technology to the adversaries, right? So like you look at this, right? You look at the rise and the evolution of the technology. It
mm.
enables them to operate and scale faster and cheaper, right? For perhaps, well, now you need that on the back end, right? So you look at it in this way that the rise in technology is also supporting the need for infusing this technology into your operations teams, cyber and or fraud related, to help support the operations because of how much more you have to do.
Are we making a rod for our own back? I don't know if that saying is over in the US as well. But yeah, because we're trying to make our lives as easy as possible, as little friction, as comfortable as possible. But that's just playing into the hands of the fraudsters.
I mean, they are one would argue they are a customer, right? So maybe they're the noisiest customer. Just obviously
Mm,
all jokes there, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you look into this, right? You see more and more entities talking about no friction, using, getting customers in, getting customers out. Yeah, you are playing into the hands of the fraudsters, right? And it's pretty dangerous. To me, it's about identifying and placing that right amount of friction within your workflow
Yeah.
to be able to protect your brand, right? Regardless if it's on the cybersecurity lens or the fraud lens, right? There has to be a good understanding and a good knowledge base of who you are dealing with and who you are working with. And you are able to appropriately identify and classify your risks.
And we mentioned the amount of transactions that are going on, the amount of data that is now available to hopefully paint a picture. When we're talking about strategy, maybe layered signals have been spoken about. Where do you stand? Is it too much data? Do we need this data? What's your kind of 2 cents on that?
I mean, I think there is. I don't. So I love the data side, right? Like to me, like that's where the home run is, right?
Mm,
Because that's where you can make your impact, right? So give me all the data that you got, right?
yeah,
I'm the belief the more data that I have at my fingertips, the better off I could be,
yeah.
right? And then you can get your creative wheels spinning. So I don't think you can ever have too much data. You can have too much data if it's not centralized and understood and you
Mhm.
don't have the mechanisms to bring it all together, right? And I think that that's probably where the answer lies to your question is firms don't have the understanding of where all the data is, what all the data means, how to bring all the data together
Yeah,
to identify my risks, to identify my red flags, to create my signals, and there create your protective measures, right?
yeah.
So I think some firms are drowning in data. They don't have the tools, whether it's humans or technology, to help wrangle it all together and then to understand it.
I mean, in the data world, the GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. But when you're using this data for insights on risk and fraud on consumers as well, you've got to be sure, right? So how are we making sure that the insights are the right insights?
Yeah, I mean, it's good governance practices, right? That's what it comes down to, right? You got to have your good governance practice. I know for us, right, the way we look at it is, and the way I look at it is, are we following the right steps in the process to investigate and to confirm something as quote unquote fraud, right? If we are not, the data on the back end cannot be trusted, right? If you have accurate decisions being made, consistent decisions being made, you're storing your data in the right manner, you're classifying the data in the right manner, you're then able to then understand it and federate it out to then say, well, if I know at this percentage of the time we are accurate, then you know the outputs of what that data that you've studied and understood is accurate, right? But you also have the rise in the use of synthetic data, right, to help support the training, the understanding. So when you are creating something net new, like a new model or a new signal, it's not just looking at good data. You've infused it with synthetic data as well.
I'm gonna dive into synthetic data. One question though: do you think fraud is just a data problem?
No, 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 no. There's a there's a there's a problem in understanding what that fraud is and what does it mean for a firm or an entity.
Yeah.
Sure, you know, through my career, I've been talking to many of my peers in the industry. There's some entities that don't care about fraud,
Mm,
frankly. Their policy is get a customer in, get a customer out, right? They don't want to classify the data accordingly. They want to classify everything as fraud, right? So it's sometimes it's the firm, it's the tone at the top, right? So, go back to the basics.
yeah.
What is an organization? What is their culture? What is their risk tolerance? What do they want,
Mm,
right? If they want more orders, well, there might be a rise in fraud, right? You probably are going to have a data issue there, but what is the overall tone at the top and their risk tolerance? I think that that's where it starts.
got it. Nice. And back to synthetic data. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're training a model,
Hmm.
right, and you're all you have is good, clean, authentic data that you have confirmed or not confirmed,
Yeah.
and that's all you're training your models on, the likelihood that you're going to derive false positives or miss new typologies is likely,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm trying to predict what could happen in the future, can't rely on the data that I have today to predict the future, especially from a threat perspective, right?
Mm,
So you might want to be thinking about projecting, assuming, thinking what could be the next threat and building that synthetic typology with the underlying data
hmm.
and infusing that into your model. So when and if it does happen, you can be alerted to those typologies and those signals.
And what have you got to be cautious of with this situation?
I mean, making sure you're not putting a heavy reliance on it. You want to make sure that it's fair and equal across the board, right? You don't want to just rely solely on synthetics or synthetic data, I should say. You want to make sure it's an equal distribution, right? What is our threat today? What do we know? What is legitimate versus what do we think could happen and what could that look like?
Yeah. Is privacy an issue here, and or even explainability?
I mean, if you're keeping the data within your firewalls, right, I would say privacy may be not as much of a risk,
Mm,
right? But if you're centralizing it or if you're sharing it externally,
Yeah.
absolutely, that's when you get into some of the risk, right? Obviously, if you're creating the data, and you keep it contained that this is just for this use case, and you
Mm.
put the appropriate guardrails on it, I think your risk is a lot less than, if you were just to share it amongst your entire analytics team, or data analysts, and said, "Here, go,"
Yeah.
right? Then you start to lose through the degrees of separation and handoffs and emails and IMs and SharePoint sites, and where that data was, where did it start from? What was its intended purposes, right? So keeping it contained, confined, in a lockbox.
Yeah. And regulators, that they're okay with synthetic data?
I think I think it helps, right? Because now you've created fairness in a degree, right? I think there's less bias in those manners, so I would agree.
Let's talk about data sharing.
Mm, best topic of all.
Yeah. So, what would you say the current culture is around data sharing?
From being here at Dun& and Bradstreet for the last coming up on 11 years, obviously in the B2B space, I've seen, and through third parties, I've seen a rise in the number of quote unquote consortiums, data sharing, peer-to-peer networks, right? And it seems to be following the same MO of the consumer third-party vendors, where they're taking in the data, aggregating it, and anonymizing it, and then churning that back out as signals. But there seems to be and I kind of touched on this a little bit, about how business entities are just different from a risk perspective, right?
Mm.
Fraud is embarrassing. I know some firms that might be owned by foreign entities, fraud might be embarrassing in their culture, right?
Mm.
So they take things a little bit more personally, and they have a different twist on it. They may not want to share that, right? Because it's embarrassing, right? So I think the general consensus is there's a willingness to share in the business space, but not entirely willing to actually share that data, right? And it's kind of a little bit of like to me, it's bizarre,
Mm.
right? If you know something, why not say something, right? You don't have to share the entirety of what transpired. We know from a fraud perspective that we are protected in helping share and helping protect other entities from fraud, right? Legally, we're allowed to, right? Obviously, within your legal bounds of the entity that you work with and who you work for. But to me, sharing is a best practice. What do when I started my career, and I was in the consumer space, it was like the number one thing. Oh, you can't talk to another bank. Banks don't talk, right?
Mm.
But then what happens when you go to these conferences? Who's at these conferences?
Yeah.
Bank professionals, fraud professionals, certified fraud examiners, you name it, out, right? What do you think they're sharing? Best practices, what they've learned, what they've seen, how to combat it, right? It's a
Mm.
community of professionals working together for the common goal, right? So I think we need to dispel this notion that sharing isn't a best practice, right? There's a rise, as I mentioned, there's a rise of third parties in the business space who want to become your peer-to-peer sharing networks in the business space. But then it takes that entity to be fully committed and bought into sharing that data for the common good, like you see in the consumer space, which is to protect one another, to get better as a community, and also to protect each other's bottom lines, right? Because at the end of the day, you could hypothesize that if a company sees a rise in fraud losses, they might have to impact jobs at the result because their P&L is impacted,
Yeah.
right? So there's all these nuances to this. So a lot can come from data sharing in the business space,
Yeah.
classifying your risk appropriately, modeling what you see from the consumer side into the business side. So I know I said a lot there, but I have a lot of emotions towards peer-to-peer sharing networks in the business space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if your neighbour's house got broken into, you want to know, right? Because probably or likely that you're going to be in the same situation.
Right.
With businesses, I think there's a bit of a why should I help my competitor kind of mindset. Because say there's one neobank who's not doing very well, fraud attacks are high, their cybersecurity and best practices are not where they should be, and then you have an established, strong player who is doing very well. Why should they help out a competitor?
I would ask it back and say, why not? Why not? What, yeah, is it you want to be competitive and not share the data? But then to me, I don't, I can't reason with not, right? Like to me, I struggle with it because You don't it's not like no one's saying, "Oh, you need to tell me every nook and cranny about these fraud cases," right?
Mm,
No one's saying, "Give me X, Y, and Z, all the proprietary data that you have," right? Share with me the occurrences of your frauds, right? Help me
mm.
understand what you are seeing so that we can develop better solutions collectively to help us both protect and mitigate fraud from happening before it actually happens. Right. So, like, again, it goes back to the common good is we're all in this together as professionals to fight fraud. Why not share or at least notify something that this transaction was bad? Why not share that this entity that you are doing business with just defrauded you of $100,000 on the first occurrence and the first transaction that you saw? Don't you want to stop that down the road?
Could there be an argument that our number one priority is our customers, it's not the industry? Or is that just gonna come back around and bite you delayed on the road?
To me, it'll just come back around. If that threat adversary gets you one time, odds of them coming back are pretty high, right?
Mm.
Wouldn't it be good to know if that adversary hit somebody else before so that you could appropriately try to identify it before it actually happens, right? That also could be the play for why you should, right? If I hit company B before I hit company A, and they or vice versa, right? Take that. Two actors, one hits A, one hits B, right? If A doesn't tell B about the actor that they got hit, and B doesn't tell A, now they're both impacted. So by sharing, you could say, this is what I just saw. Well, this is what I just saw. Maybe they have protections. Maybe they have best practices. Maybe they have things to learn from. Maybe they have things to knock down those barriers with, right? So not all fraud is the same, right? And I think why not share?
Is it a workload question as well? Because, you're fighting, your alerts are pinging you. Have you got the time to then share that data, or do we need to lean on technology to help out
I
here?
think you have to lean on technology, right? Coming back to the beginning of the conversation, what we talked about, right? The amount of transactions that we have, right? The amount of you talk to how many fraud professionals, right? Day in and day out, increasing cases, increasing cases, increasing cases. Technology helps us with that. So obviously you need to lean on technology, but it's that entity needs to be bought in and willing to share.
We're starting to go into the big picture here. So if someone's getting into fraud, going through the career or cyber fraud, very much tunnel vision. You get your alerts, you're a detective, you've got one thing to look after. And then you start to spend a bit more time in the industry, you start to grow in your career, and you're starting to become department leader, for example. What would you say is the hardest part of that transition?
Yeah, I've always felt the hardest part of that transition is going from peer to a leader, right?
Mm.
Is one day you are peers and the next day you are leading those peers, right? And I've had such occurrences before, right? And it's never easy, but I think it comes back to is what are you grounded on? What do you believe in? How do you want to operate? Understanding, I think it also creates a lot of benefit of having, that team member rise up through the rankings, quote unquote, because they share that mutual understanding of the role, right? They know the trials and the tribulations of your first line of defense teams, your investigators, right? So there's that common wavelength that everybody's speaking to. And then if it's a peers that you trust, well, now you're building a really strong culture, right? You're building a strong team and your team that you continuously invest in, grow, pull in for strategic discussions. I've had a lot of fun building up our fraud team and having success with it. I mean, I would say building it from the ground back up, and it took all of us, right? It's not me, it's not my other leaders, it's all of us collectively together, and that to me, I think, and maybe I'm kind of drifting off here from your question, but like I think that is the power of us fraud professionals is that we have one common goal, and it's to stop the fraud from happening, right? So to me, it's the hardest transition is obviously peer to leader, but knowing that you've got the backing of people that have the same mindset and are willing and have no problem rolling up their sleeves, to me is the powerful moment.
Have you seen this change? I mean, technology's changed, the typologies have altered, but the people who are succeeding fighting fraud, is this skill set, mindset, aptitude? Has this all changed?
I think generally speaking, right, Matt, I think some people are resistant to change,
Yeah.
right? They're resistant to technology. They're scared of technology, right? Let's look back 7, 8 years ago to the days of when robotic process automation was out, right? And everyone was like, "Oh, RPA is going to take my jobs," right? My mindset has always been, well, let me understand that technology before I make a conclusion. How do I find ways to enable that technology to support my operations? And it's that same mindset that I have today for AI is incredibly powerful. It's rapidly evolving. Frankly, I think it's also pretty cool in some aspects to be able to speak to like an avatar and whatnot. Quite scary also, but I've always been one to enable and chase that technology to
Mhm.
support my operations to have a stronger, I'll call it stack, whether it's tech stack or people stack. But I think what you are seeing is um a movement towards a more diversified fraud world, right? You're going to have, obviously, with the infusion of more technologies that are readily more available for us to use, you're going to see more of a diversified portfolio of skill sets. Do I think you're losing away from the dedication, the commitment, the mindset to fight fraud? Absolutely not. I think you're actually finding more of it because everybody's impacted by it.
Mm.
Every single person, every single day can go to their neighbor, go to a family member, and they're hearing something about fraud. It's everywhere. But it's where people are struggling is finding what they want to do within the field. The willingness is there, but
Yeah.
what do I want to do? Because there's so much change in the field with the rapid advancements of technology.
Where would you look? So if you were entering the fraud field now, where would you advise yourself if you could speak to yourself getting back into the industry?
That having that ability to be more technically savvy, I think is where things are shifting towards, right? Look at the advancements of AI from 2024 to 2026,
Yeah.
right? Look where it is today compared to where it was. The ability to understand fraud, yes, you can learn that. You can get certifications, etc. Part of understanding fraud is also doing the job and being in the trenches, as I like to say it.
Mm.
So that, it to me, is still a paramount, right? They don't teach that in school. They don't teach, you don't go work queues in college, right? That's on the job training, that's firsthand knowledge, learning the typologies, learning the mindsets, learning how to fight fraud and how
Mhm.
to do that churn and burn, right? But being able to tie that mindset in with a technical skill set of
Yeah.
being able to infuse technology into what we need to do to make us more powerful is where I would go. Because what do you think our adversaries are doing?
Yeah.
Just that.
If I was to be controversial, do you think the way society is now, instant reward and gratification, that people don't want to be doing the slog of sitting there and working through the alerts? Is that just how the world is now?
I mean, I think, as other people have said, people probably have become a little bit lazier, right?
Mm.
Doesn't mean that people don't have the willingness and the want to do it, but the desire to roll up your sleeves, grind out thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. When I first started my career, is it's just different as well, right? Like, again, I'll tie it back to that infusion of technology is having an impact on how people are learning the fraud game, right?
Mm.
So I think there's that, and there's so much uncertainty too. So it's hard to say that, it's not going to be there. People don't want to do it. I think it's creating that career path with the combining and learning of what is fraud, how do I fight fraud, what does fraud look like, how do I become an expert, and then how do I adopt these technologies into my own skill set to be more powerful,
Yeah.
right? When I started, there was technology, but not like what we have today, right? So all you were told is cases, 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 quality, 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 quality.
Yeah.
Technology is helping you do that, which is also impacting everybody else.
We could probably go on talking about careers and development for many hours, shall we say? But to start wrapping it up, and really appreciate your insights. and your passion as well. I've got to say that really comes through. Your kind of predictions, maybe even if we just go near future this year, what would you think will happen in the fraud?
Yeah, I mean, just starting from the top of where we started, right? The fusion of cyber and fraud. Gartner published that article last year about how you're starting to see that fusion between these two shops that predominantly stayed siloed
Yeah,
coming together, right? And mainly in the FI space. I think you're going to see more and more of that, right? Like skill sets, like-minded individuals, same common goal, right? Just maybe different endpoints. So I think you're going to see more and more companies adopt a fraud and cybersecurity fusion per se. I think, yeah, fraud is going to continue to rise. And the challenge that I think we're going to have is where in the hell are they operating from? Right? As technology advances, while these adversaries are learning how to use that technology for their gain. Right? So we're going to have to keep evolving ourselves at a rapid pace, and you're going to need the backing of leadership, executives, boards to be able to continue to fight that, right? So that means consistent reinvestment, not a one size fits all, not what I do today is good enough for tomorrow, right? So you're going to need that mindset of that churn and burn to be able to keep fighting your good fight. I think as you kind of fuse it into careers are obviously going to evolve. They're going to change, right? AI has been able to make serious headway in understanding false positives, right? You may not need that many employees going through alerts and queues, et cetera, day in and day out, while those now employees are being upskilled and trained to learn what is my AI looking at? Is it doing it effectively? Is it doing the right job? And
mm,
are we doing enough? Right. So you're going to see career shifts and adoption of technologies throughout. And I think it's gonna keep elevating itself. So it's on us as fraud professionals to continue learning about fraud and fighting the good fight, but then also learning how these tools can help us. And then lastly, sharing. I think you're going to see more and more companies' willingness to share,
yeah,
maybe better adoption of things that enable for sharing of data without actually letting the data leave your firewalls,
right,
right? So privacy-based technologies that don't allow your data to leave, and you're just sharing signals back and forth in a consortium peer-to-peer mindset. So I think you're going to see that stuff
yeah.
continue to be a top point, but fraud's not going anywhere. Fraud's here to stay. It's going to impact this day in and day out. So um, I do appreciate the opportunity to engage with you on this podcast. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully, I didn't bring too much passion, but I just
No,
want to thank you again for the opportunity.
yeah, no such thing. No, to grab kind of the headlines from that, I think it's not going to get any easier, but it's still going to be a fight. But
Yep,
that's what we're in it for. So,
so that's it.
and like I said, there's no such thing as too much passion in this space. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Andrew. We'll have to get you back maybe later in the year and see how your predictions come up. Anything you've got coming up, work, life, within fraud, any conferences, anything you're looking forward to?
Yeah, there's a few conferences that are popping up. One conference I always like to enjoy is speaking with the secretaries of states and their business services divisions, the
Nice.
ones who are forming, and behind the scenes operating the filings of new registrations and updates. So
Yeah.
that's happening in May. There's another big conference in May, um, out in Colorado. That's gaining a lot of attention. A lot of big third parties that are going to be there. Um,
So
I think
safe.
it's Safeguard. Safeguard. Obviously, you have.
Brian are going to love this podcast. They were on it earlier in the season, and it's the second podcast in a row saying, "Hey, you need to be going safeguard." So I'm guessing people will be able to find you there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there's going to be a lot of people there. Then you have the global ACFE conference in June. The May-June timeframe is usually pretty packed, and then it dies off in the summer, and then it picks back up for the fall. So yeah, I'm excited for the year. I think it's going to be a great year. Nothing I love doing more than talking to friends in the industry and learning
Awesome,
from one another.
awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, and to the guests, to the listeners, even ciao for now.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.